The Berdan rifle is a Russian rifle created by famous American firearms expert and inventor Hiram Berdan in 1868. Standard issue in the Russian Army from 1870 to 1891. The Berdan was replaced by the Mosin Nagant rifle, widely used in Russia as a hunting weapon. Sporting variants, including shotguns, were produced until the mid-1930s. The Russian Berdan and Berdan II rifles of .42 caliber are distinct from the Spanish Berdan 15mm conversion rifles adopted by Spain as the M1857-67 Berdan. Berdan I. Two different versions of the later single-shot Berdan rifle were adopted as service weapons by Imperial Russia. The first version, manufactured by Colt in the USA, is known as the model of 1868, or Berdan I. It is a hammerless, trapdoor, breech block design, and was manufactured in limited numbers as a full-length infantry rifle. Colt also manufactured a few half-stock Berdan I cavalry carbine prototypes, but these were never adopted for Russian service. Colt even produced a few target rifles based on the Berdan I. Berdan II, the model of 1870, or Berdan II, is a single-shot bolt-action with a distinctive short, pear-shaped bolt handle. The bolt handle serves as the only locking lug for the action, and when closed points upwards at a 30-degree angle, rather than horizontally. The Berdan II was produced in 4 variants: an infantry rifle, the lighter and slightly shorter dragoon rifle, a Cossack rifle with a button trigger and no trigger guard, and a cavalry carbine. Infantry and dragoon rifles were issued with quadrangular socket bayonets. Initial production of the Berdan II was at Birmingham Small Arms in England. The rifles were later manufactured in large numbers by Russian factories at Tula, Izhevsk, and Sestroresk. Estimated total production of all models is over 3 million. The rifle was known for its accuracy, simplicity and reliability. Cartridge. The 10.7 x 58 mm cartridge used in the Berdan was also invented by Hiram Berdan, with assistance of Russian Colonel Gorlov. It was the subject of many patents in both the USA and United Kingdom. The bottleneck cartridge case used the Berdan primer, its first use in a small arms cartridge. Cartridges were issued in blue paper packets of 6 rounds each. In addition to the regular cartridge for rifles, a special cartridge was manufactured for use in the cavalry carbine. It consisted of the same cartridge case and bullet, but with a lighter powder charge of only 4.5 grams, and was issued in 6-round pink paper packets. At the time of its use, the 10.75 x 58 mm cartridge was known for its power and accuracy. Later usage. No magazine-fed versions of the Berdan ever progressed beyond the prototype phase. Russian troops, however, did have various cartridge holders, such as the KRNK, a quick loader, attached to the rifles to aid in reloading. By the late 1880s, Russia began the process of replacing the Berdan with a high-velocity and magazine-fed rifle, and this resulted in the adoption of the Mosin Nagant. In 1892, a batch of 3004 Berdan II rifles were converted to 7.62 x 54 mm for Russian service by arms makers in Belgium. These rifles have new barrels and sights, and new bolts with a front locking lug and longer bolt handle. Had the conversion been deemed fit for service, an additional 40,000 were to be converted. However, this did not go through. Sporting rifles and shotguns were remanufactured in Russia from surplus rifles after the Mosin Nagant was adopted into service. These firearms can be found as ornately engraved, well-fit and finished custom sporting rifles, intended for the Russian ruling class, or can be just simple unadorned shotguns. Finally I thought of something. I offered to him to exchange his old gun for a new one, but he refused, saying that the bird anchor was dear to him because of the memory of his father, that he was used to it, and that it shoots very well. He reached over to the tree, took up his gun and began to stroke on the stock with his hand. Markings on the Berdan rifle usually consist of the Imperial Russian double-headed eagle cipher on the top receiver flat, the manufacturer's name in Cyrillic, date of manufacture, and rifle serial number are on the top of the barrel. Some rifles also show a date of manufacture on the receiver. The serial number was also applied to the bolt. Additional proof marks and property markings are found on the receiver and barrel. There is a factory cartouche on the right side of the buttstock. Uses: Russian Empire. Both the Berdan I and Berdan II were used by Guard units in the Russian army during the Russo-Turkish War of 1877–78. Russian forces, although ultimately victorious, were badly mauled by the very long-range fire from Turk Peabody Martini rifles at battles like Pleven. After the war, a long-range auxiliary sight was adopted and retrofitted to the Berdan II infantry rifle. The bird anchor, as it was called, continued on in Russian service even after the adoption of the Mosin Nagant. Many Russian troops had Berdan rifles in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. During World War I, some Russian second-line training and service units were armed with the Berdan II. It is common to see Berdan rifles in photos of street fighting taken during the Russian Revolution of 1917. Ethiopia. The Russian Empire sent 30,000 Berdan rifles to Ethiopia before the First Italo-Ethiopian War. Kingdom of Bulgaria. Berdan II was adopted by Bulgarian army. The Kingdom of Serbia received around 75,000 rifles as military aid at the turn of the 20th century. It saw service in the Balkan Wars and the First World War in the hands of Serbian soldiers of the third class. The Swiss military bought 8,900 in 1869, but these were replaced in favor of the Vetterli soon after. The Berdan II saw service, though by then very limited, in Finland as late as World War II. In the Finnish Civil War of 1918, troops stationed in Finland still had Berdan rifles in storage, and some second-line troops continued to employ the Berdan II. During this conflict, newer rifles were not always available in needed numbers, so Berdans saw limited use on both sides, as the Finnish military was not interested in the obsolete Berdan. In 1919, some 2,500 were issued to the Suojeluskunta General HQ. When the Suojeluskunta obtained modern rifles, the Berdans were returned to Finnish army stores. About 3,000 Berdan rifles were issued to Finnish troops during the initial stages of the 1939 Winter War due to the great lack of modern infantry weapons. These rifles were replaced by more modern rifles as soon as it was possible. It appears that the Finns retained the Berdan rifles in store until scrapping them starting in 1945. In 1955, the remaining 1,029 were sold abroad, mostly in the U.S. through surplus arms dealers.